It's called From the Personal to the Collective, a History of People. It brings together Anusha Yadav and Lina Vincent, who will be in conversation with Naresh Fernandes. Anusha is a photo and paper artist and the founder of the Indian Memory Project, an online public memory initiative which has significantly reshaped how personal archives are accessed, circulated, and interpreted. Lina Vincent is an independent art historian and curator with over 2 decades of experience in arts management through her consultancy LVAC. She develops research-led programming that engages with printmaking, histories, living traditions, and ecological perspectives within the arts. Naresh Fernandes is the editor of Scroll.in and an acclaimed author of books including City Adrift and the Taj Mahal Foxtrot, trace the layered cultural and social histories of Bombay through meticulous archival research and storytelling. So, without further ado, Naresh, Lina, and Anusha.
Good afternoon. Thanks everybody for skipping your siesta and coming out. I hope everybody has had double or triple espressos. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much to the organizers for having me here. I'm the oddball in this room. I sort of come to this not as an academic or researcher. I come to this as a journalist and a non-fiction writer. And so, of course, my presentation is going to be blandly straightforward, a description of, I suppose, what you would call process and essentially what happened after I wrote this book. A couple of weeks ago, on March the 19th, a bunch of well-wishers gathered in the Bedford County Golf Club in England to celebrate the 100th birthday of this man, Roy Halladay. Roy isn't particularly well known. He's spent his life as a journeyman musician, playing drums in a variety of jazz and dance bands for almost 6 decades. The only reason I know about Roy is because he popped up 13 years ago in the comments section of a website I had started on which to post snippets of information that I had been unable to include in Taj Mahal Foxtrot, a book I wrote about the history of jazz in India. Roy Halladay shared rich memories of his time in India as a soldier during the Second World War, and especially of the time, he spent in Mussoorie in 1947, in the summer of 1947, dancing to the music of the Parsi saxophonist Rudy Cotton. Oh, I'm clearly dyslexic and I'm going the wrong way. This is Rudy Cotton. Incredibly, in the room at that same time was one of these women, Angela Middleton. And she popped up on my Facebook page to continue to share memories of those moments in the summer of 1947. And she had actually known Roy. And 13 years ago, they began on my Facebook page what I hoped was the frisson of a romantic relationship, but I think my hopes are dashed. But they began to sort of recreate this time 75 years ago. And Roy, now 100, is the oldest member of the Taj Mahal Foxtrot Facebook group, but there's also... This was him the last time he gave a performance 3 years ago. He's the oldest member of the Facebook group, but there's 95-year-old Frank Leiden, formerly of Calcutta, now of Alicante in Spain. There is 77-year-old Arthur Gracious, also of Calcutta, now of Perth, Australia, and dozens of others. The children of musicians, researchers, and fans who populate the comment section of my Facebook group and the Taj Mahal Foxtrot website 15 years after the book was published. And they keep sending new material about this time between the 30s and the 50s. But before I go on to tell you about how the project became almost self-generating, I should explain a little about the origins of my obsession. It's the result of the Indian theatre scene being broke. In 2007, the annual festival at Bombay's Prithvi Theatre decided it would feature only musicals for that edition. And Denzel Smith, an actor and producer, asked if he could use a couple of the essays I'd written about the Bombay jazz scene as the springboard for a play that he was going to ask Ramu Ramanathan to write. They envisaged a cast of dozens of people, but could only really afford 2 actors. So they thought that they'd gather old photographs of Bombay bands from the 40s and 50s and Photoshop our protagonist into them and project these images onto screen to make it all seem larger than it actually was. And so we visited the families of veteran musicians to ask them for old images, and my greedy eyes drank in this wealth of material lying in trunks and lofts across Bombay. There were elegant images of performances and performers that spoke of collaborations across racial and cultural lines. But there was also a treasure of ephemera, program notes, newspaper articles, and advertisements. The visual device that Ramu had imagined he would use was soon abandoned because it proved to be a little clunky. But 2 decades later, the play, which goes by the richly descriptive name of Jazz, is still running. As I began to look at these family albums waiting to be devoured by termites or destroyed by leaky water tanks, I realized that there was a book to be extracted about the lives beyond the frames, telling the story of African American musicians who came to India in the 1930s, whose Indian sidemen, many of them from Goa, soon became skilled jazz musicians themselves. This is Chick Chocolate, who lived down the road in Aldona. And how some of these men tried to give jazz an Indian expression, both as art music and by unfolding it into the soundscape of Hindi film music. It was also the story of how innovation is incremental, building on the foundation of ideas that others had begun to work on, but perhaps not fully realized. Ironically, while there was significant textual and visual material about that time in the 3 decades from the 1930s, there weren't many recordings. Few had been made, and they weren't easy to find. In the formal archives, Indian jazz fell between the cracks. It wasn't considered Indian enough to be collected. And so I had to begin to try to imagine what this music sounded like, extrapolating in some way from the few dance bands records that were made and the solos on those, but mainly from the incidental music in Hindi film. And swing and jazz appear not only in the compositions, but when the credits are running or in the incidental music. It really helped that when I was writing this book, this fellow called Jerry Pinto was researching a book about a dancer called Helen. And many of Helen's films at that time were only available on VHS cassettes. As it turned out, I had one of the last working VHS cassettes players that Jerry knew about. And so I would go off to work, and as I was walking back home, because Jerry is deaf, I would hear this music blaring all the way down the street. And so from the street, I would be able to hear this sort of incidental jazz and swing music. So thank you, Pinto. I would hesitate to actually go home because the volume would have deafened me too. As a journalist, I have a realistic appreciation for the ephemerality of my material. As we're always reminded in the newsroom, today's newspapers, tomorrow's fish wrap. And so, in an act of megalomania, I approached the Archive and Research Center for Ethnomusicology in Gurgaon to ask if they would like to have copies of my material, the stuff I'd gathered for my book. The ARCE, after all, is where all my serious ethnomusicologist friends deposited their research material. Shubha Chaudhary, who runs the place, graciously accepted my 2 bazaar bags full of papers and CDs and catalogued the mess. A few years later, she helped acquire a humongous collection of material related to the Jazz Yatras, the biannual festival that had brought musical giants to India for 3 decades, starting from 1978. Oh, this is the material that actually did get recorded. The material for the Jazz Yatras came from the family of Niranjan Javeri, the impresario who at the heart of these Jazz Yatras. There was correspondence, publicity material, posters, press clippings, and much more that had sat for decades in a garage in Bombay, and this was all dispatched to Gurgaon in 51 crates. When the team began to sort through it, they felt sick because there was all this fungus on the material, and they had to work wearing masks. They also worked to restore the spools of the recordings of the yatras that had been stashed away in that garage. Much of it, unfortunately, too fragile and oxidized to retrieve. This has resulted in the creation of a large collection of material about Indian jazz that sits alongside 226 collections related to other Indian musics, establishing the context for how jazz became an Indian music. Over the years, this material has formed the basis for dissertations by several scholars and has been used by researchers writing about that era and that milieu. It's been displayed at 2 exhibitions at the IIC in Delhi and at Serendipity in Goa, curated by Prashant Panjiyar, and is also a dreaded Google Arts and Culture exhibition. A Canadian artist named Shelley Bell used one story from my site about a singer named Amru Sani, who may have been an Indian from Jamaica, but she wouldn't let on. And Shelley Bell used that as the basis for a character in an exhibition she called International Women of Mystery. The most unexpected byproduct of this work is in London. There's a chain of restaurants in that city called Dishoom, inspired by Irani restaurants. Each Dishoom outlet recreates a fantasy Bombay from a specific period. The one in Kensington uses pictures from the Foxtrot collection to conjure up an imaginary jazz age Bombay. And they have a band playing weekly called the Marine Liners. To mark its opening in 2017, Dishoom staged another musical based on the collection called A Night at the Bombay Roxy. And to give patrons an almighty fright that can be quelled only by drinking a lot of liquor, my likeness was inserted into the cocktail menu. All of which goes to demonstrate, I think, that even if a collection has confounding silences, the density of the material in it will perhaps spark responses to fill them that are impossible to anticipate. Some in the realm of the imagination, and others, since I'm a journalist, the way God intended, firmly aiming for verisimilitude. Since my collection revolves around music, I'd like to wrap up this presentation by jumping back to the beginning. When the now centurion Roy Holiday first contacted me in 2014, he said that Rudy Cotton had been playing rumbas based on Hindustani rags, and he wanted to know if they'd ever been recorded. Unfortunately, Rudy Cotton didn't make any commercial records. But when the folks at the ARC began to digitize those delicate tapes of the Jazz Yatra, the one that captured the inauguration of the very first edition of the Yatra in 78 stayed intact. And that featured Rudy. It was the first time I'd ever heard that famously silky saxophone tone that everybody had raved about. And then a little later, we found a clip of him at a documentary that a Polish film crew made about the 78 Yatra. So here then is Rudy Cotton performing a jazzy version of Rag Soni, a rag that evokes feelings of longing, the pain of separation, and intense devotion, which makes it a perfect reflection of the spirit of the obsessive collector and the devoted archivist trying to track down an elusive piece of material. Thank you.
So hi, thank you Naresh, and it's lovely to be together with both of you. It's been a great platform and we've discussed so many things from the morning that I think that my entire presentation content is reduced quite a bit. Some of you, of course, know us, know Goa Familia, and I have to say that I am one half of the curatorial team with Akshay Mahajan, whom you have already seen earlier, and we both have been running Goa Familia from 2019. So I think we have to say thank you to Rahab over here for introducing us in the first place, and that's how Goa Familia came about. Do I use this? So I was thinking about memory so much that it sort of jogged all these, things in my mind. And here is an exhibition that I curated in 2014. And there at the end of the list of artists, you'll see Indian Memory Project. So, it was quite amazing actually that all that time ago, I am a curator and art historian, and I have been working with contemporary art as well as museum-grade art historical material. But these intersections is what has been something that I've been deeply interested in. And this kind of material of telling stories from the past through people's memories is something that has always caught my attention. So, Goa Familia here, as I said, is something that began in 2019. And it began, I think, in a very, very experimental form. We didn't have a set methodology of how we were putting it together, but we were putting together stories and memories of families in Goa. So, opening it up into this space was something of a challenge in the beginning. Some of you who were in the discussion in the morning would have heard me repeat this whole thing about the insider and outsider, which becomes a very big question when you're trying to talk to people about their histories. Everyone is not willing to open up their cupboards or their trunks or their attics to strangers. Also the purpose. What is the purpose for which, you want to take the material? Are you just telling the stories, or are you going to commercialize the pictures, which is something that a lot of people were suspicious about? Being acknowledged as a part of Serendipity Art Foundation at that time, that has very generously supported our work and our exhibitions over the years, gave us both legitimacy as well as dislike, I have to say. Because in Goa particularly, or I think in any community, in any space, there is always a discomfort with someone who is coming from the outside to build a festival or an exhibition or whatever it may be. So we, I think, faced a lot of closed doors in the beginning. But when people sort of began to understand that, well, we didn't mean any harm, and we were genuinely interested. We were not selling cheap posters of old photographs, but we really wanted to construct something that was going to be shared with open audiences. That's when, one thing led to another. People began to open doors. The introductions are so important. So being in touch with the right families gave us that introduction to others, and we were able to, develop a lot of very, very beautiful conversations. And, meeting people and bringing back what Jerry said yesterday about people being archives. I think that has been very, very central to everything that we've managed to collect so far. So for instance, Antonetta, whom you see in the center over here, she in fact has Alzheimer's, and her memory comes and goes. And her son, Marius, is the person who was able to share with us a lot of the memories that he has collected from her. And even though she would remember lots of things from way back in her youth, she had forgotten things in the recent years. But this is all part of what we've been talking about what, we can rely on that voice that's coming to us. But, we can't be 100% sure. And I think that we also made a decision not to be, in that position of validating any information so strongly. We were interested in the stories. We were translating the stories that were told to us. And in also saying this, I want to say that it is a collective effort. Our entire program is built on people's stories. It's also to do with our team, people who can speak Konkani, Marathi, Portuguese, who can read different languages. And language here is a deeply, deeply important thing, because we may not have been able to access some things entirely if we had not had access to the language. We, in fact, have loosely built a methodology of, there goes my notes, but we've loosely built a methodology of as the case goes, because one size doesn't fit all. We have to each time build relationships with different people, understand how much and what they would like to share, then work on a process of collecting, digitizing, of course taking permissions for what would then go into an exhibition. Which is why I have highlighted the exhibition as the site for our research, because we have been working towards exhibitions over these years. And each time we build a context, each time we build a concept and we begin to put things into it, is when all these new stories come up. But the material has its own path. We don't hold any of it. We digitize, we return it to the contributors, and anything that is printed is always in a very, work in progress way. We use the exhibition site as one of work in progress research. So we have made a very, I think, clear choice to stay away from the white cube approach, but make it more homely, make it more people-centric, so that people who are contributors recognize their space in it and are able to share further. What we also have been doing is to actually facilitate the coming together of various different archives, archivists, people who may not call themselves that in the term, but are doing that all across Goa. So it has been, I think, more or less a kind of learning experience, because each time there are new people who are telling the stories in our exhibitions. The exhibition as a site becomes there, really crucial, because these interconnections and the jogging of public memory happens only when the archive is in view. Something again that Jerry, you were saying yesterday. When it comes into view, we of course do have a very, happy Instagram page. A lot of people have contributed short stories. We put them all there after cleaning up some of the, content. But this is where the beauty of the entire exercise comes into play. People come there and then they say, oh, that's the person who actually brought the rishta for my aunt way back in so-and-so date. And someone else will recognize something else and then bring in an entirely new story and say, oh, this person went to work with my aunt in Jamshedpur and now they have a successful restaurant there. This is the kind of, we have become witness to these incredible stories and interconnections and intersections of the private coming into public space. And it has been, I think, thoroughly rewarding. So we usually have open calls, and we also have very consciously intersected with contemporary expressions, less in the past, like you see with Nishant Saldana's work here, and more recently, because our last exhibition was entirely related with possible futures, that is, people who are working on contemporary archives of whatever subject that they may like to work on. We've also done a very, very exciting exhibition, which is called Let the Sound Linga, Awaz Gazumdi. And this really delved into music and the connections of Goans with music, right from the traditional development of musical gharanas, as well as the later intersection with jazz, with the Bollywood film industry, and of course the club scene, not only in India, but also across the diaspora. This was a very, very special story, you can say, because Abdonio is no longer with us, and we made a very, very beautiful series of interviews with him, and his family helped us with all the documentation and the images. And then a month after the exhibition, when he came and spent time there, he passed away. So for this sort of thing, I think that we as Goa Familia feel that we have contributed something in the long run. So always, contributions make our stories. In facilitating these archives coming together, we have contributions from individuals. We have also collaborated with people like I forget the name of the Bombay group. Okay, Citizens Archive. We've collaborated with the Citizens Archive. We've collaborated with people like Nalini Elvino D'Souza, whose wonderful work on clubs in Africa was something that became central to this part of the exhibition. We documented the work of Alan Costa, who was one of the, who led a lot of the original radio programming here in Goa. We in fact, interacted with so much of beautiful material that as curators, sometimes it's awfully difficult to even decide what do we put in there and what do we leave out, what do we represent and what do we make absent. So until the day of this exhibition even while the exhibition was going on, people were bringing us material. And we also, often build our exhibitions in different materials. That is, we use music, video, film. We use also, here music itself became really important. We had impromptu dance sessions. We had Lisha and Freitas who does some wonderful work with old vinyls come and do a series of sessions here. So it's always been very, very, very inspiring. Coming to 24, we had an open public space in the park, which was a very different experience for us because we'd been working within heritage buildings for all the previous exhibitions. Here we built this whole archive of potential Goan futures. I think some of you who participated in the exhibition are here in the audience. So, it's always wonderful. 21 or 22 groups were exhibited here, and there was so much conversation. I can't even go into it, but please do, get in touch with us whenever you'd like to know more. But we had an amazing variety of stories from across Goa. These are just, snippets of the kinds of people who were part of it, who are documenting different histories across Goa. And then we also have special collaborations like this one we had with the Museum of Christian Art. We did a very special exhibit for the exposition of St. Francis Xavier that happened in the same year. And again, open calls. We just enjoy open calls so much because people send us the rarest of stuff and people send us the weirdest things and also very lengthy things. There are things we can't use. There are things that, we've kept for future stories. But since we have been reliant on the Serendipity Arts Foundation for funding, because the absence of funding is something that we can't deal with, but we have been, wanting to take this forward in different ways, and we're, hanging in there and thinking about ways in which to take it forward. We also did a very beautiful piece on the Goan stage. Some of our work with Goan theatre, which we in fact worked on in the music exhibition, came into this and got extended in collaboration with Kaustubh Naik. So again, some really, really incredible material that probably is part of certain archives in private and public spaces, but really hasn't been seen very much. This part of it is the Goa Familia, but I'd like to very quickly also bring in another project because I also spoke about it in the morning. And that's Sanduka. Menaka, of course, as part of IFA, the work. And for those who are interested, please do access the site. It's got a very, very beautiful interactive interface. And again, here, working with oral histories became something of a huge challenge because this whole, the hierarchies of community knowledge, class, caste, religion, region, race, everything. I mean, as a cultural practitioner, you think sometimes that you can be immune and stay inside this academic space and write about things, but it's just not possible on ground. It becomes complex because people question everything. People want to own, gatekeepers want to own information in certain ways and they won't let you put it out. We in fact got threats, we had sabotaging of our work in the public, we had certain people turning others against us, closing doors for us, creating the absences more than anything. But I think that despite everything, we managed to work through it again with the help of Kodava people in the team. And this is Coorg, by the way. For those who may not be familiar with South India, it's where the coffee comes from, Coorg. So we spent a lot of time there documenting things that did and didn't make it to the website, because some of them are sacred, some of them are taboo, some of them are not meant for public discussion. And so editing is something that becomes a huge process when bringing lives of people from their homes and their ritual practices into the public space. So these are a few snippets. We always work with other teams. Obviously, everything is a collaborative process. This too was with an entire team of people, researchers, people who were developing material, people who were looking at language, who were looking at authenticity, though that word is contentious, but yes, looking at facts, looking at what was possible to take out there in the best possible way. So I think with that, I'll sort of close this. That's a brief introduction of this interaction with oral histories and this space that we are all in. And I'm very happy to be here on this panel.
One is that I'd like to thank Alka, Anita, all of you for inviting us for this event. This is a brilliant, brilliant place to present. I haven't presented Indian Memory Project since COVID, so I'm out of practice. I forget about things about my own archive, but this is a great opportunity for me to relook at things and reconsider things as well. So I actually, Memory Project has turned 16 years a month ago. I started this on the 27th of Feb in 2010. We are in 2026 now. And in these 16 years, one of the questions that I have always been asked by many people who have fallen in love with it, which is that, how did you get the idea? And so I keep going back to one of my favorite photography writers, which is Vicky Goldberg, who would said that ideas are like viruses and strangers catch them. I reckon I caught something in 2008, but it took 2 years to become symptomatic. But what I can tell you is that what I brought to it. This presentation is a little long, please bear with me, and I will eventually wrap up. I'm not a trained historian, I'm not an academic, but what I am is a trained editorial designer and a professional photo artist. I think in design processes and patterns. And every editorial designer works with messy information. Text, photographs, a client's blurry vision, and the job is to synthesize all of it into coherent voice and useful and ideally beautiful. Every archive and library deals with messy information. The job is to organize it, contextualize it, catalog it, make it easy to find and useful. And I enjoy it because I have fun with it. I'm good at that. That is a personality trait. This also makes me a very decent detective. My friends call me Detective Yadav. In fact, I was recently promoted to Senior Detective Yadav because, it was time. But I'm committed to the cause of rabbit hole research. I like finding patterns. I'm interested in unnecessary information, details that don't fit. I like solving puzzles. And so all of these things come together, including an interest in human behavior, an interest in motivations, body language. I've come to a conclusion that people are capable of anything on a spectrum from good to evil, usually both in the same lifetime. And lastly, I am deeply invested in spreading delight. I am elated to make or discover things that captivate people. It's not a small motivation, it drives everything that I do. The virus finally caught in 2010. It expressed itself, and I then gave it a value system, like any brand that needs to know who it is, what it stands for, what are its standards. But before I go into what the archive has taught me, I wanted to say something to many of the people in the room. Many of you have followed it for years. Some of you have contributed to it financially or even with stories. Some of you have written about it, talked about it, sent it to people you thought would love it. And you have been the finest advocates I could have asked for. You have done it out of nothing but genuine affection. And unknowingly, you have lifted this project on your shoulders for the world to take note, and I'm very, very grateful to you. So these are some of the observations that have come together. I would like to say that what I'm sharing is not a universal rule. These are not universal rules, but they will always be exceptions. But these patterns have shown up consistently enough that I trust them. All of these pictures are from the archive that have been given with great delight. And one of them is everybody wants to be witnessed. Across contexts, being witnessed is one of the most profound human needs there is. It intensifies with age. The older the contributor, the more urgent the story. People want to get things off the chest before it's too late. They want to say, I was here, this happened, it mattered. The photograph was always the democratic proof of that. In this archive, there are many photographs, as I'm sure many of your archives contain as well, that strangers insert themselves into people's photographs. Not out of mischief, but out of instinct. To be in the frame was to exist. To be outside, it was to be irrelevant. Across every class, caste, religion, and region in this archive, across 16 years and hundreds of entries, people found a way to be photographed. The desire to leave evidence of one's existence is not just the privilege of the wealthy or the powerful. What differs is access and medium. People share, this is something Naresh and I were talking over lunch as to, do you get entries all the time? I don't get entries all the time. People share information when they can afford to and when they can't afford not to. People will share ideas, information, money, access when they feel secure, when they have nothing left to protect, and when they have something to gain. The archive has taught me to read the conditions under which people share. Sometimes it comes from stability, someone secure enough to open their family history to strangers. Sometimes it comes from release, someone old enough that the secret no longer needs protecting. Like my aunt who told me on her deathbed that her elder sister had committed suicide. It wasn't chickenpox, which is the story that we were told all our lives. Or my uncle who, at the age of 80, discovered that my grandmother was my grandfather's second wife. And those are the things that people only get to find out much later. Sometimes it comes from incentive, the knowledge that the story will be read, valued, and preserved. But what looks like generosity is often timing. The person who said no for 20 years may say yes tomorrow, not because they changed their mind, but because the circumstances changed. This is true of contributors, it's true of funders, it is true of everyone. You ask at the right moment and you will be surprised how much people are willing to give. With families, another thing is that things can get personal. When we collect stories from families, one person's perspective can differ from another. Siblings can differ in perspectives in what really happened, and that can cause conflict within them. So I had to, the first time it happened, the first thing I did was add a clause in the archive that we were not responsible for any family conflict. It has really been helpful, I promise you. Posture in studio photographs, as you say, encodes a regional social order. Posture is not random. In the 19th and early 20th century Indian studio photographs, how people sat and stood was never accidental. In Bengal, educated men sat while women stood, a deliberate inversion that signaled intellectual authority and companionate marriage ideals imported from the Brahmo Samaj reforms. In the west, south, and the north, women sat cross-legged or in stools or chairs, including the Lakshmi principle of domestic centrality and prosperity. A retired photographer who ran a photo studio in Agra once said, "A standing Lakshmi gets tired, she runs away." Whether the people sat on a chair or on the ground was also a signal. On the ground meant he or she was either the youngest or has the least status in the family. Family portraits and group portraits also radiate pecking order, and I would argue this remains true even today, and as people organize themselves for a picture. Patriarchs and matriarchs in the center, spouses are flanking, children at the edges, elders forward. The photographer was, and perhaps still is, the cultural police, staging poses to match cultural systems, the unspoken expectations of whomsoever walked through the studio door. Every image is a negotiation between the person who wants to be seen and the culture that decides how. This was something that became apparent after my mum also passed away, and I will get to that story in a bit. But in South Asia, and this has happened number of times in many of the stories that I've collected or the interns have collected, which is that we will remember them as Dadi, we will say Nani, we will say Badi Amma, we will say all of that, but we will not remember their names. And often because nobody has even told us their names. Within 2 generations, a woman who raised an entire family is reduced to a relational title. Her husband's name survives, attached to his profession, property, public record, his accomplishments, but hers will dissolve. The archive has confirmed this quietly, entry after entry, and I have actually gone after many of them saying, please try and remember, get in touch with whomsoever you can, but let's get a name. This is a photograph I had taken when we had gone to immerse my mother's ashes in the Ganges, and these are ledgers that are kept by priests along the banks, family records that are maintained for generations, tracking paternal lines, births and deaths added post-ritual. But women's names are rarely included unless someone insisted. I took this photograph at the same time. My mother was the first woman recorded in my father's family line, not because she was special, but it's because she inherited estate of my father, which was one of his last wishes before he passed away. The Hindu widow has legally been entitled to inherit her husband's estate since 1956, but most women are expected to voluntarily surrender their rights. And a lot of them do. My father's wishes were fulfilled. Fortunately, my uncles and cousins are very, very nice people, and they respected my father's wishes. When I asked the priest why there were no female ancestors' names in the document, he flashed his iWatch just to show me that he had status. Then he said that he could, quote unquote, find details for 2 lakh rupees. But you don't bullshit a bullshit spotter, which is me. And he also mentioned that the Ancestry.com has approached everybody on the banks of the river, offering up to 3 crores for data, which tells you how much worth this information is and who has been sitting on it. This is something that, as the world affairs will dictate and tell us a lot more, is that there is a grammar to crisis, and the archive will inform it as well. When everything collapses, war, famine, displacement, epidemic, the circle of care actually contracts. It's family first, the kin, then community, then nothing. This is not a moral failing. It is a survival logic so ancient that it's almost biological. You cannot ask people or expect people to think about the collective when the collective has stopped protecting them. Nobody cares about the environment. Nobody cares about plastic bags when they are in a crisis. What the archive also shows is that catastrophe does not arrive equally. It arrives at the address of the poor first. Every crisis entry, partition, famine, flood, epidemic follows the same geography. The Bengal famine was a stark example. 3 million people died in the region that was still exporting food to the British. Equality is always structural. The crisis just makes it lethal. People migrate voluntarily. And that is a calculated bet. Everything else is more or less forced. If you study the migration stories in this archive, the pattern is consistent. Families move for job postings, business opportunities, they fell in love, a marriage into another city, or a child's education, which itself is proxy for a future income. The voluntary diaspora story tends to trace back to an economic anchor or a human one. This matters because it means that appeals to ideology, to the environment, to the abstract environment improvement doesn't move people. Security and belonging does. If you want to understand why someone will or won't make a change in life, in work, in where they choose to be, they have to see where the income anchor is or where the love anchor is. Everything else is noise, though I think these days I have discovered that people are moving for fresh air, which is a good thing. Nothing changes more than what we find is shocking. Privacy is not fixed, it is negotiated by power, by law, by economics, and by culture. What must be hidden in one generation becomes ordinary in the next because the consequences of being seen change. There's one of my favorite books is written by a lady called Deborah Cohen. She's written a book called Family Secrets, The Things We Try to Hide. It documents something that was incredible. In the late 18th and early 19th century, India was where young European men went to get rich. And when families from Europe sent their black sheep, hoping distance would contain the damage, it didn't. The empire was a hothouse of secrets for every kind. There were roughly 20,000 British men in India at the turn of the 19th century, majority of them unmarried. They left a considerable human legacy in the shape of more than half the children baptized at St. John's Church in Calcutta were illegitimate Eurasians, which tells you something about what was being hidden, by whom, and how successfully. Privacy is not chosen. It is enforced by those with the most to lose from its removal. This archive makes it visible and contains stories of illegitimate children, suicide, affairs, addiction, abandonment. These things people now submit voluntarily, but which would have required silence 2 to 3 generations ago. Widow remarriage was private because it threatened caste and inheritance. Illegitimacy was private because it threatened family honor. Across all of this, mechanism is the same. What must remain private is what threatens the structure of power. When that structure weakens through law, economics, change, or time, the need for secrecy weakens with it. Secrets don't disappear. They just move into silence, into behavior, into the next generation. What could not be said in the 1940s can be shared today. What cannot be said today will most likely be ordinary tomorrow. This is something that I quite believe in quite strongly, which is that a choice of language of an archive is a choice in audience. When I built this archive, I chose plain English. One, it is easily translatable by Google because Google recognizes normal plain English, not institutional English, not academic English that is open, that can be interpreted, but just English that anyone who learned at school could read without feeling inadequate. That was a species choice because language doesn't communicate, it selects. If you speak a language known only to 10 people, only 10 people will come. And you will work 10 times harder to keep them, market to them, prove your relevance to them, because that audience barely multiplies on its own. An echo chamber doesn't amplify, it exhausts itself. English was practical, it is our lingua franca, the bridge between a Tamil contributor and a Punjabi reader, the language the subcontinent already uses to talk to itself across its own borders, albeit it is still a small population. But translation of the archive helps. Until recently, for 5-6 years ago, the archive rendered in 50 languages. Now technology, it can render it in hundreds now. I don't even need to put a translation plugin now. It will just do it as long as the algorithm can read that you are used to reading a certain language. P.K. Nair, the film scholar and founder of National Film Archive of India, said once that the archivist must not control who the audience is. That is not the job. Information confers status. Who gets access, who gets collaboration, who gets attended to, and who does not. These are not accidents. These are policies. which are useful in certain contexts, but not for an archive like mine. But I do not curate visitors to Indian Memory Project. People come for all kinds of reasons. I have seen search terms where they are looking for groceries and they land up, or they're looking for adult terms, pornography, all kinds of reasons why people would come. And they stay for the story. You build the door, you don't get to choose who knocks. But access is not just mine or the archives to grant. Every contributor who sends me their family's most private moments is also making a choice to grant access to strangers, to the history, to the future. It exists because of two simultaneous acts of generosity, and that is what makes it real. There is one more translation none of us can afford to ignore anymore, and that is the new upcoming generations. The next generation is not less curious. They just speak a newer vocabulary, relate to a different grammar, and we must all find legibility in that. Because if the next generation cannot find a way in, everything we preserve will simply wait in the dark for people who will never come. This is something that I've been thinking about only because I'm middle-aged now. So now I think about what happens after. Memory in South Asian culture, or what archives have made visible, is that how memory depends on living networks. Our stories are conserved by aunts, neighbors, priests, and shopkeepers who occasionally will say a name aloud, or maintained family records. But when their witnesses die, the names went with them. Every archive faces that law. Stories are vivid when contributors live with them. 2 generations on, even the most carefully preserved records begin to thin. Not because anyone forgot, but because the social structure that kept it alive no longer exists. A story unread, unlinked to a living person who cares about it, is not memory. It is storage, and storage decays on its own. I built this archive to prevent a specific kind of loss, which is that I did plan for longevity. But for 16 years has taught me is that archives will not prevent loss. They will just slow it down. Every story we collect buys one more generation of legibility. That is not a failure. That is what most of us can do. The question is whether someone in the generation after ours will choose to keep buying time. I don't know the answer, but perhaps that many of the younger generation is in the room, maybe somebody will. And this is my last point, which is that whenever an opportunity has arrived in my life that seems a little risky or extremely exciting, and if I can see a great anecdote, I have whispered to myself, do it for the story. 95% of them have turned out to be amongst the best decisions of my life. I cannot believe that I have had certain adventures because I shouldn't be having them, but I do. But the fun is not lost in me. The project built entirely on finding other people's stories has taught me that eventually I must trust my own. When the project became quite visible, I know that many people expected more from it. Many people, all of them who were well-wishers, do merchandise, do more exhibitions, do more talks, do more collaborations, and all of it, I can assure you, extremely flattering, extremely good for your morale. But most of it, I found, it pulled me away from the one thing that actually keeps this archive alive, which is that the work of finding the next story. There is a paradox. The opportunities that came because of Indian Memory Project were often the same opportunities that would have taken me away from it. I had to choose, I chose the story. Because there is one thing I know is that there are exhibitions, there are merchandises, there are partnerships, but nothing beats a new story. This is still true. And this is why also I can sustain it. It doesn't trap me. This project really frees me. I answer to no board. I have no minutes of the meeting. I hire interns and volunteers now and then, and their primary job is also the same: find more stories. The archive informs everything else I do. It has made me more curious, more optimistic. This entire subcontinent is one of the craziest places we have the great luck to be in, and it is aggressively surprising. Something that is always beautiful, something that is absurd, But that's the only motivation, which is that I do it for the story. Thank you.
Thanks, Anusha, for that manifesto. I think, Lina, at the top of your presentation, you spoke of something that we have been discussing for the past 2 days, the fickleness and the fallibility of memory. And Anusha, I wanted to start with you. As a journalist, I seem to be wedded to fact. When we interview people, we know that sometimes stories are at variance with fact. For instance, I was speaking to somebody about the music of the freedom movement, and I interviewed a guy whose mother sang at August Kranti Maidan, as it's now called, at Gwalior Tank during when the Quit India meeting was going on. She was pregnant with him. And then his father got arrested. And he had this wonderful story about how then, when he was finally born, he was taken to Yerwada prison, where his father was in prison with Gandhi, he said, and Gandhi dandled him upon his lap. But Gandhi wasn't imprisoned in Yerwada. He was imprisoned in the Aga Khan Palace. Do you fact-check your stories?
I fact check quite a bit. I fact check what is fact checkable. But what happens is that I've often told families that if you have been told something and we cannot verify it, then I will write the line or something to suggest we were told this happened. We cannot. People were told that we owned Havelis in Lahore. How many Havelis can there be after all? But so we say we were told, and we were told, and which means that yes, it could be fact, it could be that people are just embellishing their stories, but I let that be. It's okay. It adds spice. Kahani mein twist.
And Lina, what is your strategy for dealing with this?
I think that we try not to do too much validation, like I mentioned. But we have a very interesting situation here because the politics of Goa and the Portuguese history coming together with every change that has happened in the recent years has really created a kind of separation from one generation to another in the kind of memories or the kind of acceptable identity there is. So I think we've faced some very interesting and we've walked the thin line of what to say, whether it's factual or not. But we've walked some thin lines of presenting stories as they are, by perhaps just deleting certain things here and there that don't pop up, but also keeping in mind that the grandfather's generation thinks different from the son's generation, and therefore the grandson. So we've come across these absolutely different points of view, and we have to care for that when we're telling the story. And I think sometimes the image itself allows us to focus on certain aspects and not on certain aspects in the text.
Yeah, the journalist Frederick Noronha speaks of the specific Goan condition of nostalgia, and I think this is something all of us have to deal with. How do you cut through this fog of golden ages? Anusha, do you ever have to tell people that their memory how do you deal with the Havelis in Agra? Do you have a discussion about that at all?
No, not really. I will just say that, see, if this is what you believe, then you believe in that. You can't contest people's beliefs. They believe in an idea and you can't make them change. So you have to just say, just to safeguard your perspective. And I make it, and I think it's good also. For them to be protected is good for me.
And what is your responsibility to the people who are listening to the stories about the Haveli? Do you think they in some way should have a device to signal something about the image of the story?
The image of the story it becomes the central point. It's like a movie trailer. It's not the whole story. The story is outside in the margins. And so whether somebody mentions a Haveli or that my grandfather was a billionaire, these are things you cannot verify. And I mean, we have people who've sent ghost stories as well, which is what somebody said, which is amazing. But you have to say that we had heard that the priestess said that, we had heard that this happened, and it protects the person who's telling the story. And that is something which is very good for the protection of the project versus because anybody can come and challenge them, right? And my best way of, there have been many instances where people will come and challenge a story. And my response to that is that you can just send another story because this, the archive can accommodate contradictory stories. It should. It can't just have one perspective on it.
You know, until a few decades ago, the possession of the sort of images that all of us were showing, it's a marker of class if you have a picture from your grandparents' generation. How do you correct in a crowdsourced archive for only the register of a certain class being recorded?
I don't. I have, anybody can send. It just has a criteria. It needs to be owned by you. It needs to be before a certain date. It must come accommodated with a narrative. That's it. It does not matter to me where it's from, what time is it from. Do I find it exciting? I don't find it exciting. I have posted the most boring of stories because I can't decide who this archive will be used for or that picture. That's not my decision. That is what I will follow PK Nair's thing. You cannot determine your audience. You don't know what people are looking for, and that's not the job at all.
And Lina, do you all try to correct for gender, for class?
So we've often been asked about our methodology because people have come and said, how come you don't have pictures of the tribals? And how come you don't, show this demography? So we've been very honest in terms of explaining a little bit about the access to photography itself. And it is driven by class, it is driven by privilege, and we cannot change that in any way. But in saying that, we have been very careful about trying to access people from the north, from the center, from the south of Goa, to get the landscape into the picture in some larger form, in understanding what Goa is all about, as well as the diaspora, because there are so many stories that connect Goa to different parts of the world. So that has made a huge impact because it covers a lot of the landscape. And then I think that something that we've tried to do also is to, I've just forgotten, sorry.
I've always seen myself as a sort of manic collector in the manner of those fellows who go to Chor Bazaar and try to buy every bootleg that the Beatles ever did. What is the difference? Do you think there's a line between the collector and the archivist, or is that irrelevant?
The collector does it for themselves. The archives do it for others. It's a service. It's not to hoard. And that's, in my world, that is the definition purely.
I remembered, if I may just add that. So one very interesting anecdote actually, in our exhibition, Families Are Like Rivers, which was looking at the river and using it as a kind of metaphor for how families flow and, change course and die out or thrive. And we had a very interesting conversation with a photographer, Savri Kulkarni, her husband in fact, who suddenly remembered that his father-in-law had a camera at one point of time, and he comes from a fishing village in Beti, which is across the river from Panjim. And because his brother was working in the customs, he got his hands on this wonderful camera and started photographing everything about the boat building that they were doing. So that was such a beautiful archive of regular, very regular images of boat building, which would not have existed had it not been for the fact that his brother was in the customs and that camera had come by, you know. So such occasions is when the class divide sort of breaks down. And that's very special, I think, for people like us, because then we have access to something absolutely new, and then we can talk about it and put it into the larger picture in images.
I wanted to just also add one of the genres of photography that you will find across class is weddings. And weddings is where, when I started this archive, that I remember that was the first spurring moment, was that at least everybody has one wedding picture, because it becomes a legal document. And when it becomes a legal document, or a passport photo, for instance, even for Russian applications and all, but of course, so that is when people would spend that money. There's a story which is going to be published in the next few weeks, which is these three men who have traveled from a small village to Rawalpindi, spending almost 8,000 rupees in today's day and age for them, or even more, to take that one photograph, just because the son is going to go away to Bhutan, he's taking the 9-year-old brother with him, and there's no guarantee that they will ever return. And that is something, when it comes to that finality, is when people start investing in things like photographs that become that one memory that I can retain, or a family can retain of the person. It requires necessity at that time, I think, more than what we do, which is take 75 selfies and not even that, and be happy with those.
Businesses of Belgium. And we realized that the amount of material in the city of Belgium that is photographic, from the ceramic, from the ceramic memorials of the every in the cemetery to the ancestor portraits, multi-generational. These shops, and these are not, they're from the guy who sells fishing equipment to the poshest emporium. There's imagery upon imagery upon imagery, and then these sort of democratic spaces outside the privilege, like Lisbon studio, Hollywood studio, which, or Naverkers, who's documenting temple practices. The image and its history, it's everywhere, but we do, just like we read all the signs, we read all the plaques, but there are also these almost a kind of non-privileged representation of these images everywhere that we kind of ignore because we don't see them anymore. So we also did this kind of mapping of that, which was kind of interesting.
I'd like to go back to something we were talking about slightly earlier, which is there's been the explosion of Instagram projects, for instance. Everybody's calling themselves an archivist. Lina, you see mentorship as one of the primary sort of things that you do. What advice would you offer these people who call themselves archivists? What sort of skills do you think they need?
I think what I tell everyone whom I work with is, first of all, be committed to what your objectives are, because there's no point, it's pointless to do something for a day, for a week, for a month, and then give it up in this larger space. But allow it to connect to your story in some way, and then tell that. Be committed to it, and then put it out there. The other thing I always say is be aware and sensitive, because it's so easy to take things that are not yours, or to say things that are crossing lines in some way. So that's another thing I kind of focus on, in that this is our practice as well, that we need to be sensitive in this space of research and in this space of documentation and curation. So always be aware of that, whether you're telling your own story or someone else's, because that is something that's crucial. I think those are a couple of things that come to mind.
Anusha, in addition to do it for the story, what would you tell the Instagram archivist?
I do two things. I use psychology. I try to excite them into this idea. Is that, number one thing I do is that I ask them to write their own story. Because what it does is that it puts them into the shoes of the people, and to make them feel the discomfort that families feel when they tell stories and how they remember things and everything. So that is a great starting point. I think I have not, it is a so far 100% success rate that they write their story and suddenly they understand what is to be done. And the second thing is I tell them that they are detectives, and it is a very exciting role for them to play, and that they do get excited about the fact, they do want to find out, they'll voluntarily do research, and it's something that I've seen. You excite the people you're working with, you transfer that enthusiasm, and they will do the job that you want them to do. And of course, I do have a value system that they must follow. At the end of the day, they're representing the project. There is a code of conduct. They have to do those things. And then, but other than that, these are the two main things I do. And it's worked amazingly.
But they start as junior detectives.
Yes.
Let's open it up for questions.
This is a question for Anusha, but it kind of wraps all of you. Your work exists as a book, so it's sort of the most permanent in its form. Yours as exhibitions, which evaporates after it's over. Probably you store, or you also have storage which you can draw for your next editions. Yours is in the cloud, and probably is the most fragile in a certain way. If you don't renew your domain name, if you don't pay your server services, poof, it's gone. It could, other things could also affect it. How do you deal with all of that?
Lina and I were talking about it recently. One of the things I've done recently is I've ensured custody of the project. I've ensured that if anything happens to me, what happens to the project after? And that means leaving funds behind. So renewing your domain names, renewing your hosting service, all of that. Having said that, there is that, yes, you know that, I mean, there are already, it's possible when Iran threatened to cut the internet cable at the Strait of Hormuz, you know anything can go wrong. But it is just cutting that access. And the way I have managed to do it is I just keep a copy of every story in hard copy form. It's not organized and arranged as beautifully as in the archive, but I have all records with me as hard copies. Yes, I will do that, but I've kept that right now on the side. I would like to do it myself. I don't think I've been approached by 3 publishers to do a book, but nobody wants to pay the contributors of the photograph, right? So that is my condition. You have to pay an honorarium, and they have all refused. And I said, it's okay, we can live without a book. It's not, I'll do it on my own. I'm a book designer, I'll do it.
This is a question for Naresh. Fascinating story presentation. I loved it so much. I was wondering if you have salvaged more of that music and if there's a way to listen to that. And secondly, the piece that you played, I was just trying, you mentioned that it's a raga.
Rag Soni, he said.
Yes, and then I tried to close my eyes and I tried to figure if I could sense the Hindustani-ness of it or not. I think I did, but maybe because of the context you provided. So I was just wondering if this happened before the word fusion and all this happened. So what kind of pentatonic scale were they operating on? What kind of confluence was happening between the Hindustani classical and the American jazz?
So actually, and this is sort of one of the things that I was fascinated to discover as I did my book, is that long before, standard jazz histories will tell you that John Coltrane introduced Indian elements into jazz. But from the mid-1940s, Indian musicians were trying to find a way to blend these systems. And we know this actually only from program notes and from their descriptions of it. And none of that stuff, none of the scores exist, and none of the recordings exist. And so this piece by Rudy Cotton, which harkens back maybe 20 years, he'd been doing this music for about 20 years by that time, is the only fragment we have of what they were trying to do. So yeah, it exists in the realm of the imagination.
But it's also said that, I mean, the Indian classical musicians always say that it's extremely impossible, almost impossible to fuse the two forms because of the way Indian classical music is structured and the octave scale, which is very different from jazz, which works on the pentatonic scale. So, what was this fusion like that was happening at that time?
So there were two things. I mean, one is that often it was using percussion instruments, but it was simply harmonizing Indian music. And that was happening actually on two registers. So one was in the art register that he was doing it, but in Hindi film music, they were using elements of of harmonization, and it was jazz harmonization in a lot of the stuff that happens, for instance, in the cabaret scenes. And so I think that was a more organic, commercial-driven fusion, and people don't even define it as fusion, but that was happening from, again, the sort of late 1930s, mid 1940s. So,
I have a question for, I think, not a question, but yeah, is that I liked your title of your, because this is something that I had also included, but I removed it, which was that the comment section is a secondary archive. And that is something that, yeah, it's just, there's a lot of information that is found in the comments. And in everything every movie, everything that people will add more layers to that. And how does that work with your work?
I mean, I've told the story many times before, but so essentially my website is the stuff that didn't get into the book. Yeah. So it's actually, and Pablo, you reminded me, I need to print out all that stuff because that could disappear too. But I've had some wonderful moments in the comments. A woman wrote in from Hawaii to say that it was her grandmother's 80th birthday. Her grandmother had actually been born in Calcutta. She was an Anglo-Indian woman, married a Hawaiian musician going through, but she had made these records in Calcutta. Did I have them? As it turned out, I did. And when I put that up, many far-flung branches of this Hawaiian family began to congregate in the comments. They had lost touch with each other, and they had a family reunion. And then the same thing happened to a Filipino family who had performed in Jamalpur in Bihar in the 1930s. But I think the most wonderful moment I had in the comments was when I did this one piece about Rudy Cotton, and somebody popped up to say, my mother said he was my father, but I never met him.
But the comment section is incredible. It is where people meet. People across generations have found cousins, uncles, aunts, used gymnasiums, gone to shops. And what happened with yours? I'm sure.
There's like several times this has sort of happened, and within the exhibition space as well as in the comments. So it's really crazy. I mean, it's just an extension of the same thing. But we've had people finding someone that they were related to in the picture and say, can you please find the address of this person? Who gave it to you? And then, of course, it's a quandary for us because what if that family doesn't want to meet this person? We cannot share that information.
But that is something that I have found a way around, which is that I will never share a contributors unless they have given permission to do so. So I keep forwarding emails to everybody, and that is very helpful. I just wanted to say that in the morning, I released an updated website of Indian Memory Project for the new gen.
Oh, lovely.
Please have a look. If there are bugs, let me know, because they can be. Bye.
All right, thank you. This was such a wonderful thing. Very, very refreshing for a Sunday afternoon.